a ride is out of the question.
Down with this sort of thing. Careful now. The nation holds its breath. Yes!
Hello and welcome to Friends in Low Places, the podcast where four middle-aged men deliver a light-hearted and honest and sometimes slightly cynical look at navigating life after 40 while glancing back at growing up in Ireland during the 90s and 80s. Gentlemen, all good?
Hi, Sean.
You well? Sean?
Good. Now, in today's episode, we are going to dig a little deep and tackle some questions about midlife that we never really thought we would discuss via the medium of a podcast. And to navigate us through this discussion is our special guest and host of the Midlife Men podcast, Philip Briscoe. A warm welcome to Friends in Low Places, Philip.
Thank you. It's an honour to be here.
Hi, Philip.
So for our listeners, Philip, maybe you can give a little insight to your background and, of course, your own podcast and maybe a little bit what we're going to tackle today.
Sure. Yes. Thank you. So I'm also a middle-aged, a midlifer, and about 3.5 years ago, I decided to start a podcast called Midlife Men to really focus on, the fact that there's a lot of men out there, especially in midlife, who face struggles. Sometimes they're mental health related, sometimes they're just those midlife struggles. But as men, we're not very good at talking about it. So we tend to bottle it all up and then think we're the only person in the world that's feeling the way they are. And even when you're with your mates in the pub or wherever you meet them, coffee shop, the conversation rarely gets beyond anything that looks like banter. And so what I do is I interview men around the world, and we call it recovery narratives. So essentially they talk about their first-hand experience of particular struggles that they've had and how they found a way forward, with the idea that people listening can get something from it, they can relate to the speakers and they can take something away that may help them. So that's the idea behind it. And I'm about to release, in fact, tomorrow, the 100th episode. So
congratulations. Well done, Philip. Yeah. Fantastic.
Excellent.
But I'm very honoured to moderate our conversation today, and I'm not going to delve too deeply into things that you don't want to talk about. But I think it's a great opportunity to ask questions that perhaps none of us are that comfortable answering, and just see are we all alone in the things that we've experienced, and actually proving that perhaps talking about it might help and might help people listening as well. So perhaps why don't we start by looking at, if I ask you, what do you think the hardest thing about getting older is that no one warned you about?
Anyone to go?
Making a noise every time you bend down to pick up something. You want to keep it lighthearted. I think myself, Philip, there's a bit of loneliness as you get older, because you become a little bit, I think you're isolated, or I find myself, sometimes I'm isolated in that I would have had, say, you're very active in your 20s, maybe out chasing that future wife. Then you get busy with family and kids and run around, and then they start flying the coop, and suddenly you're back to kind of, well, what do we do on a Saturday, Sunday? We're out weeding the garden and cutting the hedges and that sort of stuff, rather than laying in bed on a Sunday with a hangover, maybe after having a raging night out with your mates, which was kind of probably in your younger years, a reoccurrence of every weekend. But for me, I think it's a little bit of loneliness. Your phone isn't lighting up as much as it used to, you know what I mean? You kind of have to keep working on keeping those relationships alive. Now, obviously, we're four mates that started the podcast, so I suppose we're combating it in our own way. But I'd say for others, I'd be of the opinion that people probably find loneliness a little bit.
I think that's common, actually, because as you get older, your social circles can tend to get smaller, especially if you're focused on family or work or whatever it is. And anyone else got an alternative to?
Yeah, so I suppose for me, and I've actually it's probably true to say that I've enjoyed the process of getting older, in the sense that I'm probably happier now than possibly I've ever been. Now, that correlates with getting older. But something, I suppose, that my dad passed away a couple of years ago, and my wife's mum passed away just a couple of months back. And obviously you experienced more death and more grief, both directly and then indirectly, because your friends, maybe their parents. So I suppose there's more of that around. So I suppose that's something. And again, I imagine that as you get older, that will actually accelerate. So I suppose that's been a difficulty with getting older. And I remember speaking to someone a while back who was much older than myself, and that's something that they'd lived to quite an old age. But one of the things that they'd mentioned as quite difficult is they'd watched a lot of their friends die, and they were the one person that was left out of that kind of friend group. So I suppose we're kind of at the start of that process, parents, etc., etc. But certainly that's something that I suppose has struck me about getting older.
And we don't talk about death much, do we? We don't tend to, until it happens, and then we're always surprised.
Yeah. For sure.
Yeah, it's inevitable. I was going to mention, like, responsibilities that we all have at this stage of our lives. It can be overwhelming, like the financial burdens, the utility bills, the monthly stuff that everyone has. And then me and Suzanne were just talking today, actually, and we've come to the realization now that we're parents of one adult child and one teenager already. And I'm just thinking, where did that go? It goes fast when everyone's busy looking after what they have to do, doesn't it? You know? So, we all have to do that.
Have you talked to, your four friends? You do this podcast. Have you talked to each other about any of these things? I mean, do you kind of share some of the worries that you have, or do you tend to, because we're hardwired not to really show any vulnerability? Do you guys tend to share problems that you have, experiences?
Yeah, we do, though.
Yeah, I think we do. The beauty of these gentlemen is that there's no judgment. So I think it's always been that case down through the years. I think that's why we found it. I suppose that's why we're still yapping away at each other every week for the last 30 years. That we know where there's. We're able to talk about what we want to talk about, and there's never any judgment, and it's usually the opposite, support or celebrate, whatever. But I don't think so, guys, unless I've got it totally wrong for the last 30 years.
I think it's probably something we've gotten better at.
Yeah.
And the one thing I would say, and I don't think we're unique in terms of this, I think this is something that you could, I suppose, you could say about lots of groups of men. Oftentimes what happens, I think, is we go to the pub, we have 2 or 3 or 4 pints, and then we start to talk about whatever it is that we'd like to talk about. But at that stage, you're potentially slightly inebriated. Maybe your friends are too. So I suppose there's a detriment to the quality of that type of conversation. So sometimes I think for men in particular, we sometimes need that little bit of Dutch courage, which is invariably 2 or 3 points. Then you start to have the conversation. But as I say, because you're having the conversation and there's alcohol involved, it probably impacts on the quality of the conversation. Whereas I think we've probably gotten better now to have these conversations, outside of the pub, on podcasts, obviously, that's something that we've probably improved or gotten better at over the years, or as we've gotten older.
And do you think generally men, do you think they are talking to each other? Do you think there's a lot of men out there who may even listen to podcasts like mine and like yours and relate to them, but are still, fearful of talking about what's going on because maybe they're fearful of judgment or appearing weak or don't want to expose themselves vulnerably? Do you think that's quite a common scenario?
Yeah, I would say generally, but I would also say that I suppose there's more education of why talking is, healthy and required and all of that type of stuff. So probably we're maybe the last generation, I don't know. So I think younger men nowadays have been brought up in probably a slightly healthier environment as regards that, and they're more open to talking,
Well, there's less stigma nowadays as well, like in the media. I mean, it's like to your podcast, Philip, and like it's more accessible now to get help as well, you know.
Yeah, but I think it's very apparent as well that mental health is a more debilitating illness than a physical illness, because, you know, I've seen it myself through working that, you know, people with mental health issues struggle to get back to work, you know, whereas people with physical issues are just gagging to get back. You know, they're trying to find any way they can to get back and get active again. So I think it's very important that, you know, we identify that and realize that going forward. You know, but is everybody walking around doing a mental health check every day? I doubt it. But I think we're definitely starting to accept it more and more.
Yeah, I would say I've had to get, I've had to treat my mental health more like I previously treated my physical health. So in the sense, I don't see these things as altogether that different now. So in essence, if you want your body to be healthy, you train your body. If you want your mind to be healthy, you train. Now that would be a relatively recent thing. So in other words, I would have went to the gym, for instance, in my 20s or in my 30s and stuff like that. But certainly in terms of my kind of mental health and mental training, meditation, etc., that's probably something I've only really practiced more recently. But again, you know, I do need to keep an eye on my mental health. I do need to I suppose, look after it in the same way that I do my body, the gym or exercise, etc.,
And are there any signs, you know, can you tell yourself if you're going off track a bit? I mean, are there other things that you might do that try and, you know, accommodate for mental health? Maybe, you know, they're coping mechanisms.
Yeah, well, you know, so drink would be one, as a for instance. You know, so there's kind of lots of things that you would do, and I think when you're younger and perhaps you don't know any better, that's possibly one of the places that you would go. But ultimately, you know, drink is a depressive, as a for instance, so it's not really going to have a positive effect. In fact, it'll probably have a negative effect in the longer term.
Yeah, well, 3 or 4 years ago, I started going to the gym, and now it's a habit. Now it's great. It was hard at the start, but I'm 2 or 3 times a week. But it's good for the head. Some days you don't want to do it, but then when you go in and come out after the hour, you do feel better. I think it's dopamine in the brain or something. Isn't it? So,
Yeah, it's taking, I mean, I've talked to a lot of men about this, but just taking very small steps forward can make a huge difference, whether it's just walking, you know, extra to the office every day, or, you know, having a bit less to drink. I mean, unfortunately, with things like alcohol, which, you know, a lot of us increasingly, you know, find ourselves quite dependent on without realizing, it's a very, you know, it's a very slippery slope. And I think often you can be, you know, you're drinking too much, but actually you might not necessarily think, well, that's because I'm, you know, my mental health's quite poor at the moment, or I'm feeling a bit depressed, or I'm lonely. And it's difficult to make those judgments. I mean, have you any of you, you know, experienced times where you have felt things were a bit out of control, you know, and what have you done to try and help yourself? I know, Niall, you said, you know, you go to the, sorry, Aaron, you go to the gym. Niall, you said, you know, you also, you know, invest in that. But, you know, have you had experiences where, you know, you've been in quite a low place and not really known what to do?
Don't think I've been in that low place, or I don't know, maybe I was and I didn't know it, but I do find when the pressure is on, you tend to sort of turn into yourself a small bit, in the sense of just keep being busy, keep being active. You know, personally myself, I find if I keep telling myself, okay, I have to go for a walk, you know, because I feel guilty to having been for a walk, that's not necessarily more for physical health. It's more for just put on the headphones and put on Philip's podcast and listen to that for half an hour. But I, you know, I'm sure there is others that have fallen to very low places and struggled to come out of it. But I haven't experienced that myself.
Yeah, so my marriage broke down. Now, ironically, the marriage breaking up wasn't the consequential thing. It was the impact that had on my relationship with my children, or in the sense how hard I had to fight to maintain the relationship with the children. So after that happened, I was in a very, I suppose, low place. And to the extent that I had to rebuild both my life and myself back up. Now, ironically, the version of me that you see here now is a hell of a lot stronger, and I would say a hell of a lot better than the version before him. But quite literally, I had to almost start from the start again to build myself right back up, you know. So certainly that was an incredibly low period, you know.
And did you do that yourself? I mean, there's a lot of, I guess, people are mystified about kind of therapy and going to see somebody to help you through it. And I think a lot of men are scared of doing that and wouldn't consider doing that. I mean, is that something you would consider doing, you know, getting professional help? I mean, you go and see a doctor, right, if you had something physically wrong.
I have done it. I've done it over the years. I've gone for counselling a couple of years ago now, but now I just do a lot of bits online as well for mental health. But yeah, counselling was good. It took a big step to do it, though. It was kind of, then I wouldn't tell people, and the family knew, but everyone knows now. It was a good thing. It was a good thing.
Yeah. It would be hard for me to do that. I always convince myself that when I'm low, I can fix the problem myself. And I just need to kind of sit down and take stock of what's causing me to be in the place that I'm in. And like for my 20s and 30s, the coping mechanisms, you know, changed as I grew older. In my 20s, there was a lot of, you know, smoking stuff, and, you know, 30s then kind of turns to pints, and then 40s, you know, it's kind of wine, because and it's easy because I can afford it, like I have it, it's easy to get. So, and then you just, if you have a good time, or, you know, if you're having a good day or you're having a bad day, you can have an excuse to open up a glass of bottle of wine. That's kind of snowballs for me. But I finally, you know, it took me till maybe I was 45, and I was a couple of years ago, I was quite sick, and I saw this video online, and it was of this guy in his 70s or late 70s, and the headline kind of went, how do you want to be when you're this old? And it was a split screen, and one was the guy hopping out of bed, hopping on his bicycle, heading down to see the grandchildren, playing with them all day. And then the other split screen was, you know, a nurse coming in to help him out of bed and to feed him. And yeah, and I was just watching this, and I was feeling pretty low, stressed about work, stressed about being sick, and the dad bod was, you know, growing slowly but surely, and I just felt I wasn't managing things well. And I said, okay, now maybe it's kind of time for a change. And I think that probably would have been a good point to say to myself, maybe I should go to do what Aaron did and go to therapy. But I always have this other voice in the back of my mind saying, let's try and fix it ourselves first.
But if you had a medical issue, Sean, I'm assuming you wouldn't have a difficulty going seeing a doctor, yeah? A medical doctor. No.
Well,
eventually we go.
Eventually my wife will drag me to the doctor.
After some encouragement.
After some encouragement. But but, you know, while I was lying in bed sick and I couldn't talk and I couldn't eat anything, then kind of the low point mentally started coming, because I was thinking about everything else that I wasn't doing right at the time. And why am I sick again 6 months later, after I was like out sick again for a week? And then I just said, okay, I think it's kind of time to change. And as we go back to the point you made, Philip, a few minutes ago, it was the little things. So let's start changing the diet. Let's start putting in regular exercise. Let's start doing a bit of meditation, breathing techniques. Let's make sure you get your walk with the dog every day. And I'm lucky enough to live beside a forest, so I can go out into the forest and start doing things like that. And then 2.5 years later, you know, I lost 12 kilos. I'm in a much better shape mentally, and but it takes a long time to get there. But I just wonder if I had done what Aaron done, I might have gotten there quicker. I think
there's definitely evidence to suggest that just talking to anybody,
Yeah.
because therapy, counselling doesn't work for everybody. You don't know till you try, but just talking to anyone really, not just another man sharing similar experience, but anybody. But what's really interesting from what you're saying, Sean, is you had a kind of defined trigger point or tipping point really, where you thought, right, something has to change. And I wonder if any of you have also had that sort of point where you thought, right, I have to do something now. Enough is enough. I need to change something.
Both Sean and myself have worked for the same company for a long number of years, and both of us actually changed job in 2019. What were you, Sean?
2020, yeah.
2020.
Very close together, yeah.
And oddly, both of us went back to our same employers. But I think for me in 2019, it was time. Something had to change. I was working, way too many long hours. Wasn't focused enough on family as kids were growing up around me, and I just decided that I needed out, and the out was to change job because I couldn't change family, or wasn't going to change family, and that change, even having gone back to the same employer, I'm in different roles, it's totally different, and I'm approaching it differently as well. You just get sucked into this chasm, I think, of being busy and not needed to break the cycle. Could you have just decided one day to flick a switch and break that cycle without changing the job? Possibly, but for me, I had to move. But I think that that for me would probably have been the biggest reset I've had. Prior to that, our eldest lady is fostered, so we would have had to spend an awful lot of time when she was starting to come and live with us through the HSE here in Ireland. Spent an awful lot of time being interviewed and had to sit down with different counsellors and stuff like that. So I think that gave me a good base to work off of, many years ago. And I tend not to leave what are probably serious things get me down as much as they might get others, but definitely I think work has, because work is something we do, most people do it 9 to 5 days a week. It's a big chunk of your life, that you've given over to this, and just need to provide, I suppose.
Do you think we change as we're in our, 40s, late 40s, 50s? Do you think naturally we look for something else in life? Because when you're younger, it's all about, the career and the young family and, if that's relevant. But then as you get older, exactly as you were just saying, Mike, perhaps you realise that the path you're on isn't the path you want to be on. Did any of you see that you wanted to make, a change as you were getting older? Because certainly talking from my perspective, once I hit 50, I could kind of see over the horizon, and I wasn't this eternal youth, and I was a long way off, hopefully a long way off, the end of my life. But did I want to spend the next 20, 30 years doing what I'm doing now? And the answer was no. Have you guys had similar sort of experiences?
Yeah, in the sense that I would say it's up until fairly recently where I have, I suppose, given myself the space to be myself. So in other words, and it's not necessarily that I was trying to be someone else for other people or any of that type of stuff. I think it was, and the lads I think sometimes would laugh at this, but like I actually lacked a lot of confidence. I didn't really believe in myself. And that's probably something that has only happened kind of recently. And again, just to go back here, this is, I think, a mistake that now, and I made this mistake, right? So I'm not, but sometimes when we talk about therapy, so I've spoken to various therapists over the years, and it's been a mixed bag. So like, you know what I mean? Some have been great and some have been not so great. But I think sometimes the mistake we make is we wait till it gets to a crisis point, when in actual fact, probably rationally or sensibly, the time to talk to a therapist, to talk to someone that can help you is well before that kind of event happens, The other thing, so I suppose the other thing is, as a result of hitting like really rock bottom, I had to build myself back up. but it was also an opportunity to, I suppose, build myself slightly differently. So while that was a big negative, also some huge positives came out of that. And I now know through that process that I'm one of the strongest people that I know. So even if something was to happen tomorrow and it was, significant, I'm pretty confident at this point that it's something I'd be able to handle and handle probably reasonably well,
And that's very interesting, actually, because, I wanted to talk about this idea of strength and perhaps, where men get that wrong, especially when they're younger. I mean, to you, Niall, I guess it was building yourself up again and increasing, in terms of your confidence. But, where do you think men get it wrong about what strength means as a man?
I think mental health, physical strength. A lot of people go with the too old to start myth, which means too old to try and make new friends, new hobbies. It doesn't really matter what age you are. There's different forms of strength, isn't there? Obviously, the mental strength is probably one of the hardest to maintain, I think, anyway.
But I think people mistakenly think strength is, the strong stuff, the bloke that never flinches or the guy that never cracks under pressure. There's probably more strength in saying to somebody, I'm not doing well here, I need help. Or reaching out to somebody,
Yeah.
There's probably more strength in that,
That's really hard, yeah.
Yeah, there's a huge amount of strength to be gained by admitting your weakness or weaknesses. Right. And it's probably taken me a good while to probably learn that lesson. So yeah, absolutely. I think that's something that we potentially get wrong as men, that we have to put this front of strength up regardless, when in actual fact true strength often comes, the starting point to true strength is often in the admittal or the acceptance or the honesty about weakness or mistakes. I mean, another thing is we probably struggle. I think there's a massive strength in being able to admit a mistake and then learn from that mistake and move on from it.
But I think that gets slightly easier the older you get, I think. I think when you're in your maybe 30s or early 40s, you still have that I'm fine and okay, my weakness is none of your business, as the song goes, by a group called Embrace. But I think the older you get, I think it's easier to say, okay, fuck, I don't know what to do. I don't have the answer for this. Let's reach out to someone who has the answer for it. But I certainly in my 30s and my 40s, in my early 40s at least anyway, I would never admit I something was wrong or I didn't know what to do or anything like that. But I don't know what it is. Maybe there's once you pass 45, there's something goes off in your brain where it's much easier to say, I don't know.
I don't have the answers. Yeah. I find from work even, a lot of people come to me for direction, and I kind of go on, well, we can go left or we can go right. You know what I mean? Let's go left. Right. And if it works, people think, well, that's why we went to you, Mike, because, you'd have the answer. I'm kind of going, well, no, I just gambled. It's going to be a 50-50 split. If it's not that, we'll go the other way, But I think it's okay. I think you get to a stage where you're okay with admitting that you don't have all the answers.
I think that's very powerful, actually, that there is strength in admitting your weakness. And especially as you get older, this concept of being an elder or a mentor or, teaching the generation below you. So, that's hopefully a good thing. Which leads me on to my next kind of question. We're all men of a certain age, grew up in the, largely in the 80s, 90s. What do you think it means to be a man, in 2026? And how do you wrestle with that? And how do you understand? Because we grew up in a very different time. And we've kind of lived through this transition. Many of us, and I don't know about you four guys, but many of us, our dads went out to work and earned the money and mum stayed at home. And that kind of, and of course that's changed, and we know that's changed. And that's, that's a good thing. But how do you guys think, what does masculinity mean? What is it like to be a man in 2026? And what are the challenges there?
Yeah, I suppose Yeah, so I think that, and I go back to my dad versus now me now being a dad. I think that's probably a way to kind of see this almost. I suspect that my dad would have really struggled with showing me any of his weaknesses, and it's not that he was a bad man or anything like that. It was just, for him to show his son that, or admit him, it's just something that wasn't done, and he would probably, if he was to do that, he might even see himself as a bad dad, right? Whereas the reverse is kind of true now, in the sense I'm very conscious, in a sense of not that obviously I want it, but of showing my son that I have weaknesses and I make mistakes. And particularly if I do make a mistake with my son, that I kind of go, I made a mistake, I'm sorry, that he sees that I'm flawed. Because invariably, I don't want him to grow up to be the type of man that has to hide all of that type of stuff. So I suppose that's kind of that's what I would say about it. And I do think for younger men today, there's a lot of stuff out there, the internet and so on and so forth. There's so many conflicting narratives in terms of masculinity and what it is and isn't to be a man. And there's so much information and disinformation and crap information. And, it must be incredibly confusing, because at least the narrative all be is it was 50% right and 50% wrong when we were younger. It was a relatively straightforward one to begin with, right? So the figuring of it out, even though it's taken us 20 or 30, 40 years to find out what was right and what was wrong with it was a lot easier to do. Whereas nowadays, I imagine it's very, very, very complicated and very, very confusing.
I think if you were to look back and talk to yourself as a younger man, you'd say, start building better habits earlier in life, even things like, the simple things like starting your pension, but, looking after your mental health.
I laugh at that because I just had that conversation with my son last week, and we just started the ball rolling. That's
Yeah. Start your pension, those good, healthy habits, don't lose them. You had them when you were probably late teens, whether it be playing sports, whatever. Keep them going. Be prepared to lose relationships for no reason other than they just filter away. But don't wait until you're drowning to mention you can't swim. Now, there's a word of wisdom for you.
Yeah, I would say prioritize your friends and family, and then friends as well, and try and keep your circle close to you, because life runs away with you, doesn't it?
Yeah, I would say that's actually a kind of a critical component for people, and young men in particular. It's your peer group, it's your friends. The level of influence that they have on you, I don't think you necessarily appreciate it till probably kind of later on. But if you surround yourself with good guys, that generally has a kind of a positive impact on you. Whereas maybe if you surround yourself with not so good guys, that can be quite detrimental. And the other thing I would say is, and again, not to make too fine a point, sometimes I think we get too focused in on man, woman, whatever. I think ultimately at the end of the day, the starting point to it needs to be, well, how do you be a good person? You know what I mean? That probably is the most important thing as far as I'm concerned.
But with technology these days, you'd have to fear that everybody's connected, and we've said it a couple of times on the podcast. I know from my own kids, it's like these days they know what their friends have had for their breakfast before they've even gotten out of bed.
Yeah.
So in our day, we were talking on a previous podcast about contacting each other or arranging to meet each other at a certain time on a Saturday evening, and you kind of were always there. There was no mobile phones to send a quick WhatsApp, say I'm 10 minutes away, put on a pint. It was a case of, we'll meet you where at such and such next Saturday at 7 p.m.
That was it.
And you showed up. But so the quality, you'd have to question the quality of communication that they're having. They're having communication and vast quantities of it, but is there quality in there? Is there, are they sitting down on Snapchat or whatever it is that they're using to chat to each other and having a conversation about how they're doing today?
Yeah, I mean, kind of to stay on that, I think it's difficult for young men these days because they're not. In our day, we got our principles from maybe our parents and from our school teachers. These days, they're getting it from some guy on a yacht off the Sydney Harbour, or somebody in LA or something like that, and it's coming at him, and you know, they kind of, what they end up getting is a mismatch of different people's way of living and trying to be who they're trying to be, and then they end up trying to, you know, copying that way of life based on what they're watching, basically. And I think that's and if, you know, people will kind of tend to get their values from that, and I think that's a bit sad, because then they're not looking at someone who's closer to home, and maybe, you know, maybe I should be looking at my dad, or you know, or someone closer to get maybe set my values and my principles, but they're just so exposed to all sorts of good things, but equally bad things, that it's how do you set your principles and your values?
Well, that's a time bomb, right? You know, these young guys, you know, 20 years time, 30 years time, when they're sat where we are, you know, and with mental health awareness being higher than it, you know, more prevalent than it's ever been, and yet there's something missing there. And if you look at things like, you know, suicide rates in men and young men and middle-aged men is on the increase, despite the conversations that we're having. So something isn't working. I wonder what you think.
Yeah, but I ironically, Philip, what you're doing with your podcast, because let's be honest about it, where most of this information is now, and some of this, you know, bad information, it's the internet fundamentally. So like that's where young kids or young men today get predominantly most of their information. So I think as older men, or as men, you know, we need to get out there on the internet and, I suppose, you know, present ourselves, flaws and all, mistakes, all of that type of stuff, because often that message is, let's say, very, very false. It's not reflective of that person's reality. It's put on for various different reasons, and so on and so forth. So I think there's a counter message or a counterweight from men that have maybe a little bit of maturity, have lived a little bit of life, have worked certain things out, have made mistakes, and so on and so forth, and to get that narrative out there so that younger men can kind of listen to it. So I do think, ironically, what you're doing is a counterweight, and you know, an important counterweight to some of the, you know, narrative that's out there.
But it's funny, isn't it? I mentioned this earlier. This, you know, we used to have societies where you had older people who were, you know, considered elders, or whatever you wanted to call them, who did provide advice and guidance, and younger people listened to them. So do you think there's an opportunity, you know, do we need to bring that back? Do we need to try and, you know, even formalize that a bit? Because at the moment there's a big gap, isn't there, between us having had years of experience now, and then, you know, much younger people who seem to be losing their way a bit largely due to technology, actually. And the
yeah, well, I do think, I think there's an opportunity, and perhaps, I mean, I wouldn't overstate it. So I think men are becoming better at having these conversations with each other, with therapists, etc., etc. I do actually also believe now that we need to get better at having these conversations online, in public, because of what's going on out there, you know. So I think there's a next step, so to speak, for some of that. And again, I do think that's an important thing to have happen, because again, as Sean will have pointed out, and we all know, you know, younger men are being influenced by people and things nowadays that are not healthy, and probably not good either, you know.
Like
if we can take that embarrassment factor off with you know, what we're doing today, actually, all four of you are sharing your experiences and quite openly, and that has to be, you know, a good thing, right? And people listening to this.
Yeah, there's no looking for help. Like, there's no, just, if you think you need to do it, just ask someone, a family member, a friend, just go for it, you know.
And how have you invested? Sorry, go
Sorry,
on,
Philip, I was going to say, just the last thing I was going to say, and that was the, I think anyone that has exposure to young people or young adults, whether it be through, you know, societies or clubs, like in Ireland, obviously we have the GAA, which has a big following. They need to build in some structures, I think, around the mental health aspect of things as well, you know, and dealing with, you know, like young people that partake in those kind of sports, those team sports, they see wins, they see losses. I mean, that's normal stuff that goes on. Whereas when they're looking online and they're playing games, games are designed to, keep you typed along, get you into the next stage, to keep you on the platform, basically. You know what I mean? And I think there's, a lot that can be done maybe around those areas. But are we willing to do it is the thing. Are we going to wait till it's a crisis?
And we talked a bit, I mean, all of you have shared a bit about how you invest in your mental health and how important that is. Have any of you tried, I know a lot of you have tried exercise and eating, but have any of you tried things like meditation or journaling, which are things which are talked about a lot? And I think sometimes a bit skeptically, because most people think meditation is something unreachable, it's not for them. Have any of you an experience of other alternative ways of investing in your own mental health?
Yeah, I do meditation. I maybe not daily, but quite a few times a week. And it's not a big, long session where I sit down with my legs crossed and my eyes closed, but I do a bit of meditation in the morning before I start work, just to calm myself, because I know what's coming, and my job, you have to be on your toes all the time. But that's worked wonders for me, to be quite honest.
And could you mind saying, just to demystify it, what does that look like?
So basically, I do it at work. Actually, I start work pretty early in the morning. So I'm at the office usually between 7 and 7:30. And I have myself a corner, which I won't reveal to my colleagues who are listening into this, but I find a place, and I do. There is this one small 15-minute podcast that I listen to that where I start to do breathing exercises, and then you create an image in your head of a calm place where you can go to, and then you kind of repeat a couple of sentences yourself, some positive sentences, and then you do that for about 15 minutes, and then I come out and I go, okay, right, start today now. Let's have coffee, and then I rock on. And I did that, started doing that after I had my moment 2 years ago, because I did a lot of research on that, and so I do that, not every day, but I do it a couple of times a week. And if I have any big meetings or anything like that, I usually do a quick 5-minute version of it somewhere before I go into a big conference or something like that. And it works. It works.
Yes.
I'm going to leave you with a funny story. So I once did a 2-week silent meditation at one of my lowest points. So basically, I hadn't meditated really at all up until that point. So I decided, so I can be quite extreme when I decide to do something. So I decided to do a 2-week silent meditation, not really knowing anything about meditation at the time. Now it was difficult and fantastic all at the same time. But basically, we were in a dorm with about 5 or 6 other people. So because it was a silent meditation, you didn't get to interact or speak with any of these people. But over the course of the 2 weeks, obviously, because you're in the same room and you're meditating with them and you see them around and so on and so forth, you start to wonder what they're like and so on and so forth. But there's no way really to build a relationship. But obviously, again, because you're in the same room, people fart, right? So one of the guys in the room, from his farts, I reckoned that me and him would get on very well. And I convinced myself of this. I don't know. Now, as it turns out, that's exactly because at the end of the 2 weeks, you get to talk for the first time. And myself and this guy got on like a house on fire. And we're still friends today. So you just reminded me of that, Philip, from the story about meditation.
I've never heard anything like that, really. I don't know. Was it the sounds, the velocity, or
just in the absence of conversation. In the absence of conversation, you have to figure out other ways to try and figure out or get to know someone.
Right.
So obviously, we normally, if you can speak, you normally speak, you listen, you have a conversation. But in the absence of that, all you have is movement and all of that type of stuff and how they eat. And you start to form a picture of what this person might be like and so on and so forth. So, yeah, it was interesting. But meditation for me has been a big thing. And certainly has helped me a lot, to be fair.
Is there anything else before I hand back to Sean to close out? Perhaps each of you, what a very small piece of advice that you give to someone listening to this who perhaps is feeling alone in their thoughts, struggling. What's one piece of advice you would give them based on your own experience?
Just start talking. Start talking to somebody. There's good services online, even if you don't want to go and, if you want to keep it all private and public, don't want to do anything public. Better Help. Is it Better Help or Better Health? I can't remember what it's called, but I see that advertised a lot as a counselling service that you can sign up to and speak to somebody. But talking is always good,
Communication. Don't need it sound that you're constantly arguing with your chatterbox,
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I suppose to know that all of us have had our struggles and our challenges and all of that type of stuff. So I mean, you're not different really in kind of any way. So I would say, most people will be able to identify in some respect what's going on. So to have a conversation is the kind of natural first step, and it is helpful for sure.
Yeah, I would just say it's all right to be wrong, it's okay. Nobody's perfect, and everybody is on their own journey in life. And don't be afraid to reach out to someone for help in that journey. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for your openness and honesty, allowing me to ask these questions. And once again, thank you for having me on.
Thank you, Philip.
Thank you, Philip.
Yeah, thanks very much, Philip, for joining us today. We're really grateful and thankful you took the time out of your busy schedule to come and talk to us. And hopefully, maybe we'll get you back later in the year, or maybe when we reach episode 100, you can come back and join us.
Can I just say, Sean, because obviously we wanted to get someone like Philip to do this because we felt it was so I went out and did a little bit of research and started to listen to a few podcasts, and it was through listening to Philip's podcast that I suppose that was kind of initial. So I would recommend, and I'm sure you guys in the meantime I know have listened to them, so I would recommend Philip and his podcast and those conversations in the highest possible way. It's fantastic. So it certainly is a worthwhile listen, I would say.
For sure. And we'll put the link to your podcast, Philip, in our program notes when it goes out. So, in keeping in tradition, signing off on a quote, I will leave you with this one from the great philosopher Carl Jung. Life really does begin at 40. Up until then, you're just doing research.
Very good.
All right. Have a good one.
Thanks, Philip.
Thanks for
See you, folks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Suppose a ride is out of the question.
Down with this sort of thing. Careful now.